Are you a podcaster? Maybe you've got that big idea and you're looking for a network to join. The multi-award-winning Ozcast Network can get your content to eyes and ears all over the world. Join now for the first month free, and you could be featuring this sound at the beginning of your podcast.
Ozcast.
Simply head to ozcastnetwork.com for details.
Ozcast.
Okay, Rach, are you ready to go?
Yes.
What are we doing?
I don't know. I thought you knew.
Phil, aren't you supposed to be running the show? Which guest have we got?
Don't make me the boss of stuff.
You're the boss of stuff.
Let's wing it.
And go.
Hi, welcome to the This Is My Voice podcast.
The podcast where we discuss all things voice performance and talk to some of the industry's best and brightest talent.
We're your hosts, Rachel Sallis
And Eddie Bye.
Now, our guest today is an industry icon, leading such shows and movies such as Futurama, Space Jam, and the Ren and Stimpy show. He's even the Red M&M. We're extremely privileged to be speaking with the one, the only, Mr. Billy West. Thank you so much for joining us today, Billy. Now, we always hear interviews about voiceover actors, characters, and projects, but right now we want to hear about you. Let's start from the beginning. You were born in Detroit, Michigan. Can you tell us about the early years pre your voiceover career?
I'm going to bring everybody down. It was tragic. It was horrific. I was on the autism spectrum, except we didn't have a word for it. I couldn't get my mind around most things. I couldn't tie my shoe. I couldn't tie a necktie. My father was physically abusive, and he was psychotic and alcoholic, so I was the whipping boy. And, I know it sounds crazy, but my life I took my first beating in utero. There's something nobody knows. So that was my intro into the world. My mother told my father she was pregnant, and he kicked her in the stomach, and,
Oh my
so
God.
on and so forth. And it never got any better after that until we left Detroit. My mother was a young mother that had 3 boys, and we just up and left for Boston, where she came from. She saved us. I spent the rest of my life trying to cut through scar tissue, and I tried to live a normal life, but it was impossible because the odds were stacked against me. Proclivity for alcohol in my family, and that led to other things like drug abuse. I played music. I was in a band, and I played in lots of bands, and I made a living at it. But, that whole life, if you're reckless and aimless, takes its toll on you. And in a nutshell, I got into doing comedy after the band business was over, and I got into radio in Boston. Well, in Boston, I worked on a show called The Big Mattress. It was on a station that is no longer in existence, WBCN FM, and I cut my teeth on just being thrown into the environment, and I was recording my own bits and editing and running the production equipment. But in those days, there was reel-to-reel tapes. You had to splice tape with a straight-edge razor, and you had to use a white grease pencil.
Wow.
And you had to look for edits, and you had to back and forth with the tape.
I started my career doing that as well, actually, Billy. There you go. I know the Chinograph pencil well.
What a pain in the ass. But you know what? You didn't know any better. You just thought you were king of the world because someone let you loose on some radio station, Well, I spent a lot of time there from 1980 to 1989. And then during that time, I had become sober. I had gone to a rehab and quit everything 30-something years ago. But after I lived in Boston, I decided to move to New York because I wanted to do auditions for commercials and big-time stuff. I got involved with the radio station, our sister station that was in New York, WXRK, and that was where Howard Stern was. And so, natural order of things, I began working on that show and providing characters and screwball improvs. And, it was a good place to learn on the run. One of the guys that I worked with in the trenches back 34 years ago or so, he became one of the biggest comedy producers in American television. And he was Chuck Lorre's partner. His name was Eddie Gordetsky. But I remember when we were 2 urchins, working back in Boston, and we used to just, create stuff from nothing. which was sort of a specialty of both of ours, courtesy of our childhood. I never had anything. So I had this, overamped imagination, and I had this freakish ability, stuff would just pop out of me, noises and voices. And
What happened next? How did you move on from radio?
I started auditioning for a lot of different things and in New York, and I would go up for everything. I just was kind of fearless, and my approach to performing was fearless, even though it was not considered a standardized approach. I would always look to do things that were off the nose. And it's only because I've worked with innovators and I see how they do things. And if you, do what everybody expects you to do and there appears to be rules and guidelines, you'll just be a product of that in a box with a label on it. The people that I was inspired by came in like lightning bolts, and no one knew what hit them, and it was because they had fearlessness. They were coloring outside the lines,
That takes some real guts to do that sort of stuff. With that kind of approach to your auditions and to your performances, you would have had so many no's and doors slammed, and because if you didn't fit the mold, people wouldn't know what to do with you. How did you deal with that?
I had to be pure, and I felt like I was not going to do the thing that was expected of you because there was a system. Here's how you get hired. Here, if you do these kind of things and you'll get hired. I was a contributor, and I felt like I had so much to bring to the table, and I wasn't going to change my vision of what I had to offer. And eventually, because of your courage or of conviction, somebody gets that vibe off of you. They get that energy, and they go, wait a minute, something is special going on here. And it happens to anybody that's got art in them and magic. It's like it'll have to happen. It's like somebody's got to walk by and see a diamond on the floor and have the sense to pick it up.
If we were to work together, I would want to chat with you. How was your day? What's going on? All that sort of stuff. Just general chit-chat to get you into the mood of performing. Even though I know I could just say, here's the script, mate, off you go. I'll never learn as a director if I don't hear what you artists have to say, and what you guys can bring to me. Otherwise, I'd be very closed as a director if I said, no, sorry, Billy, I need you to inflect up here, go there, fast there, happy there, sad there, and you need to slow it down by 2 seconds or what have you.
Sure. You sound very nurturing. I mean, a lot of people don't even have time for table talk. People expect a certain thing when you show up. I mean, when I started, I had a lot of respect, even though I was kind of like thumbing my nose at convention. And yes, I did get a little nervy in the beginning, like it was Tootsie, a tomato wouldn't sound like that. He was that actor, and they were saying, you got to sound like a tomato, Well, see, listen, a tomato wouldn't sound like that. He had this whole philosophy, and it was so spectrum analyzed in his world that, no one could understand what he was trying to say. It's like how he would approach trying to sound like a tomato, as an artist. And he would turn off everybody, and then he decided to become a cross-dresser and take the TV world by storm.
I mean, that's classic because nobody knows what a tomato sounds like. What it boils down to is my interpretation of what I want my tomato in this performance to sound like versus what the artist wants it to sound like might be very, very different.
But I would ask questions. I want to know how the director assessed this assignment. Is he a happy tomato? I mean, the copy says, a lot of people don't take me seriously, but I take myself seriously because I'm a tomato. I'm nothing more, nothing less. I'm a good old tomato, and I want you to try me. Does he take himself seriously, or is he silly, or is he big? Is he corpulent, or is he high-pitched, genderless? Well, early on in New York City, when I was auditioning, they had this character. It was for Honey Nut Cheerios cereal, and there was this bee. He was and it used to be done by a guy named Arnold Stang, who was an old-time actor. He was a voice guy, but he did mostly his own voice. He was the voice of Top Cat. He was a real great character and everything, but they were going to replace him. And so when I came in, they gave me some instructions. They said, the bee loves everybody, and he wants everybody to love him. And I thought it would be kind of silly to do an affectation in his voice. Again, nobody knows what a bee sounds like, but I gave him a high-pitched voice because it would be non-threatening. You're trying to sell cereal to people. You don't want people to have a second thought about it, and your job is to clear shelves, really.
Yeah.
You're supposed to be a salesman. But I would think of the best way to do it, and so his slug line was Honey Nut Cheerios, it's irresistible. And I said, that's a great word to do stuff with, irresistible. Without being too suggestive or anything, but it was a chance to be silly and do an audio logo. To be like, honey, the Cheerios, it's irresistible.
Yeah.
And I'd grab my throat like that.
Yeah.
And nobody cares what you do with your hands in a dark booth. Let's face it.
Because you do commercial work, you do theatrical work as well, right?
Well, I have been doing commercials for 32 or 3 years with M&Ms.
You're the Red M&M.
Yeah, the Christmas commercial that me and the yellow M&M did 33 years ago.
J.K. Simmons?
It still runs every year. Yeah, and you knew who he is.
Yes.
J.K. Simmons.
Oh, it's
that's
fantastic.
a journeyman.
Yeah.
He's one of my heroes. Yeah, because, he was J. Jonah Jameson in the Spider-Man movies. And he was he won an Oscar for Whiplash. Yeah. And then 3 days later, he's in the studio doing M&M's commercials with me. And then he's doing Farmers Insurance commercials, The Notre Dame Cathedral Fire. Seen it? Covered it. And that's a journeyman. He's not above anything, really. I mean, he says yes and no to things, of course. But work is work, as the old adage goes. As simple as that is, work is work. I knew he was going to be a huge star when I first met him. He hadn't really done a lot. He was on a show called Oz. It was an HBO show. It was a prison, and he was the worst guy in the whole prison. My wife, at the time I was married, and she was into this show, and she noticed him, and I hadn't seen it, so I came home, and she said, have you seen this show? And I go, no. Look at this guy. Look at this. Look at this guy. That guy is no actor. This guy is the real deal. Just watch him. And I'm watching him and I said, I know him. She said, you do? I said, yeah, he's the yellow M&M.
Work with him.
I'm very fortunate, that I can still conjure up an adolescent kind of voice. I'm 72 and I'm not supposed to be able to do any of those things, but that was the story of my life. It was like a music teacher would hear me making flying saucers and police cars and, screaming dictators and, and everything that was popping out of me. And he said, cut it out. You're not supposed to be able to do those things. Like I was demonic or something.
Why not?
And no, and I would just kind of rib him with it. But, back then, there were other kids that were like, they specialized in being unimpressed. And I bought it. I bought the whole dynamic, I'd be home and I'd think of the coolest stuff I could come up with. And I go, I want to try it out. And these guys would be like, yeah, so, and I wish that the older me could have gone back in time and said to the young me, do you know why they treat you like that? Why, older self? Because you're doing things in front of them that they will never, ever, ever be able to do in their entire life, no matter how hard they try. You're just pulling stuff out of your rear end magically. And of course they're going to sit there and go, my younger self would have said, yeah, I guess you're right. I'd hate me too.
But when you go to cons, you have people that their eyes light up whenever you do all those voices. What's the most rewarding part about interacting with fans?
I have to say that at these shows, I began to notice there was never any trouble. There was never any incidents. And I'm talking thousands of people. And I said, what gives? I began to notice that most people were on the autism spectrum. It's what they used to call geeks. I was a geek when I was a kid, except they didn't call it that. I grew up in the 1950s. The things I loved were shared by almost nobody except for like one other kid somewhere in some neighborhood, and you happen to run into them and say, you have comic books? A lot of kids, believe me, were not into that stuff. You're always looking for someone to relate to.
Yeah.
So now these cons, the people on the autism spectrum and people with ADHD and all that, they have that in common, this fandom, that they're so appreciative. And I began to notice there's a narcissist within 50 miles of the place. Everybody is an empath. No toxic masculinity, no misogyny, there's compassion, and they're awkward, but big deal. So what, you know? I mean, I was awkward. I couldn't get my mind, like I mentioned, around a lot of things, but what mattered was where my heart was and where, you know, where I learned to express myself. And these people they're there. They're in that space. There's hidden talents in people on the spectrum. There's whole storage rooms that haven't even been opened yet.
Do you think your diagnosis has actually been...
Are you a podcaster? Maybe you've got that big idea and you're looking for a network to join. The multi-award-winning Ozcast network can get your content to eyes and ears all over the world. Join now for the first month free, and you could be featuring this sound at the beginning of your podcast.
Ozcast.
Simply head to ozcastnetwork.com for details.
helpful for your career?
Absolutely.
I think that's really beautiful. And I've grown up with a disability myself. And my drunk party trick would be doing crazy voices.
There was this one girl, and you could tell that, you know, that she's had a really rough time, and I could tell she was on the spectrum. She was trying to impress me. She was doing voices and everything, and he let out this macabre noise, this growl that sounded like it was a creature from the pit of hell. And I was taken aback. And I said, if this little wisp can conjure up something like that, there's stuff going on in there. And then she started doing lines of dialogue. But she was so awkward, so like she couldn't make eye contact. And she was with her mother. And then I signed an autograph for them, and then they left. And I said, Jesus, Billy, go after them. And I had to chase them. I went and found them. You know, they were practically long gone in the catacombs of the convention. And I came over and I said to the mother, listen, I know a teacher that has an online class, and I think your daughter should follow up with it. I'll give you all the information. And I said, and I'll pay for it, you know.
Wow.
Because I said, you're going to hate yourself if you don't try to help this person.
Dude.
And I think that she's just one in many, many people. I was at MegaCon in Orlando over the weekend, and it's a massive show. And I had lines from beginning to end, and they were all fans. And there were people that didn't appear to be on the spectrum, but their children were. So they had to push their children close to me. Go talk to them. You know, go ask them what you wanted to ask them. And then all of a sudden, when they come out of themselves, it's this transformation. You know, and I'm watching alchemy. I'm watching lead turning into gold suddenly.
Wow.
And that's how I felt about characters and voices. You know, they used to hire people like me and Jim Cummings and Tom Kenny. You know, the producers would be sitting there, and you'd come in and they say, listen, we got this bar of lead on the table, and we'd like you to turn it into gold before you leave. Do you think you could do that? And you go, yeah, no problem. And now people come in and they leave the lead bar on the table, and they just go, where's my $20 million for doing, you know, a celebrity doing a voice for a movie or a cartoon.
Yeah.
Yeah, and it's like, excuse me, there's no transformation. There's no alchemy. There's no magic then. And, you know, and I cling to that notion. And I try to tell anybody that's interested in hearing what I have to say about it, that that's the way it should be viewed. It should be something for all time. It should be evergreen. Whatever it is you do, make sure you think long and hard before you open your mouth, because it might last forever. Things are important to you. You have this indicator built in as to whether something is enough or if it could be better. It's like being able to see it complete. And if you fall short of it, it'll bother you. And you keep changing things. It's the artist's way. You know, there was a book, pretty famous book, as a matter of fact. The Artist's Way is how it's very difficult to give birth to things if you're prone to change your mind because you're worried about making it better than it could be, better than it already is. But I mean, you do have to sign off on something. And I'll go back and I'll look at a lot of my old work and I'll go, ooh, you know, I should have gone left instead of right, you know, but it's so easy to go back and beat up the past. You have to give yourself credit that you made a call. You made a judgment call at some time.
Yeah.
And of course it was better than anything to the people around you. You know, they say your worst day is better than somebody's best day. You know, but I would always be mindful or fretting that, how can I make this better? You know, is there just some other thing that I can do? But, you do have to let go at some point or you'll drive yourself crazy.
That's right.
With your career with Futurama, when you're recording a conversation with Farnsworth, Zoidberg and Fry, do you just do that back to back or do you record them individually?
I'm lucky enough to be able to go one after the other as the lines are in the script. It is kind of difficult to do because you got to be mindful that the tail end of your character can't bleed sonically into the beginning of the next character. There can't be any giveaway that it's the same person. and you have to be so consistent. And I depend on the director to keep an eye on those things, but he doesn't have to with me. I mean, I got to become really adept at it. I feel so fortunate. And I told these people over the weekend, they said, how, you're so good at these things. I said, I better be. I don't know how to do anything else. Your mission is to deliver that joke the way the writers wanted it. These are Matt Groening's men and women there that are writing. And you got to honor them and their sense. They have such a unique style of writing. I mean, it was almost like a reinvention of comedic lines and comedic delivery. And I, for one, was thrilled to death, and I saw it as a challenge. As a matter of fact, there was one instance where somebody said to Phil J. Fry, "Hey, Fry, I heard beer makes you stupid," and he goes, "No, it doesn't." And I looked at it, and I said to David, David X. Cohen, I said, "David, no, it doesn't." He goes, "Is that a typo?" He no, please read it as written. Okay. All right, sure. I didn't get it. And then when I saw it on television, I was like, because it was the best acting I ever did because I didn't know what I was saying. And Fry generally doesn't know what he's saying. And it rang so true and so honest.
He's such a pure soul, Fry. And I think my favourite episode of Futurama is the Seymour episode with the dog. Just that ending with Seymour, it broke my heart. It makes you cry.
I know why, Hollywood and writers and everybody have always known that you got to be really careful with an animal in your story because there's people's emotions that are hand in hand with what happens. And we all can relate to having a cat or a dog. Most people know what it's like, and you want them to live forever, or at least as long as we do. And they don't, so you have to say hello and goodbye to a lot of little friends in your life. And they were all worth it. All the love, all the heartbreak, everything, just like children. I never had any children, so I've got a great affinity for animals and have a good cat, They make us better than we are. And I think most people realize that. So that's why that episode... I never got crying over a cartoon, and I was wistful. I was misting, and I was like, oh, my God. And everybody was like that. And I said, but how beautiful that you can create something that's supposed to be whimsy and fantasy and comedy, and then all of a sudden there's an item that you're crying over.
Yeah.
I think that's quite an achievement. I tip my hat always to the writers, to Matt Groening and everybody.
It's just such a beautiful show because a lot of it's just slapstick comedy and just laugh out loud. And then it's just like, wait a minute, what happened there? And it just came out of nowhere. And I was going to ask, with Space Jam, you're Bugs Bunny. You were stepping in from Mel Blanc. He's like the godfather of voiceover actors. How was that like trying to honour him? And what was that like for you? Was it terribly nerve-wracking because you want to do it justice?
Yes, it was exciting and it was terrifying. And there was so much you had to live up to. And you also had to pick which bugs you're going to do. Are you doing the 1940s bugs? Or are you doing the 1950s bugs? He changed with every director. Up and all the way up into the 60s where bugs got cute. Suddenly he had longer eyelashes, and Chuck Jones was the guy that did that. But there was the Robert McKimson bugs, and there was the Bob Clampett bugs. And, I knew the intricacies of his history. I tried to do what Ivan Reitman wanted, and it was a combination of like the 50s bugs, early 60s. And they got the white with Michael Jordan too, Doc, of course. And The closest thing to a religious figure that we have.
We had D. Bradley Baker, that's Daffy. Have you ever tried doing the rabbit season, duck season, where you're trying to impersonate, Bugs is trying to impersonate Daffy? It's one of the hardest things, though, that Mel Blanc got to do. Have you challenged yourself to do it?
I think that we had some back and forths in the movie, in Space Jam, like that. I remember when we first started working, and we had to play around, with the characters. And actors are playful. You're supposed to play like children, supposed to be uninhibited. And we didn't take ourselves too seriously. We just were like babes in Toyland when I think about it, on the Warner Brothers lot, and you're in the recording studios where Carl Stallings' orchestra was, and there's all this history and everything, and you get caught up in it. But again, my aim was to do what Ivan Reitman asked me to do, and so I tried to stick with that, his particular vision of things. And D, same thing. We there were pieces of business in the movie. I don't know if we did the duck season, rabbit season thing, but I mean, we could have, it could have happened. It's funny that we could have done that over the weekend, because I did a panel with him, and we're sitting there talking about the things we had done. I don't know. I'll remember that next time. I'm bound to see him, because we do a lot of shows.
Going back to your characters, you do Ren and Stimpy. How did you come up with their voices? Can you talk about the process?
I was originally supposed to do both voices, and the Stimpy voice, I always had an affinity, a great love for the Three Stooges, Marx Brothers, all the old comics, all the old acts, and the Three Stooges. There was a character named Larry, who he was kind of in the middle. He was like the least extreme. There was Mo, who was authoritative, and Curly, who was like a giant baby. But Larry was in the middle, and he was like, he didn't say a whole lot. And I said, but he was like the glue that seemed to hold them together. And I was fascinated. The little that he said fascinated me, because I just loved the sound of his voice. He'd go, "Be careful, Mo. There's too much tinsel in that tree." And I said, why does he sound like that? And because he had this nasal thing going on.
Very Zoidbergish.
But he's from Philadelphia. And I've heard other people from Philadelphia, and it's something in their plumbing. George O'Hanlon, I think, was from Philadelphia. He was the voice of George Jetson. And he had kind of it sounded like a nasal blockade or something. It's like, oh, come on, Janie, honey. The cleaners are 500 miles away. You take an extra 5 minutes to get there. And I said, these guys in Philly, there's this sound. And so I latched onto that. I was obsessed with it. I loved it so much. And then Stimpy was the cartoon character, so you couldn't have him sound like a depressed old Jewish guy, And so I sped up the voice. I put it in a higher register, and it became more childlike, and that became Stimson J. Cat. Happy, happy, joy, joy. The Ren voice, it was a description given to me by John Chris Falusi, and I listened to different snippets of actors. He had like Peter Lorre kind of incorporated into his character. The sinister Peter Lorre. I'd like a couple of hamburgers, please, and make them raw. And then there was like the eye, I saw that eye, the blinking, the winking, and a lot of manic screaming and veins bulging. And then there was Kirk Douglas, who was so intense, like from Crime Story, hey, criminals. And all this is going on, and he's south of the border because he's a Chihuahua, and he sounds kind of like, Stimpy, I told you before, and so he's like almost Hispanic, and he has a Dutch name. His name Renhoy is a Dutch name, and so or Danish or something, and he also had this. There was an actor named Burl Ives, who was a folk singer in the 50s, and he was, he was, Frosty the Snowman. He had that nice little voice that everybody liked, and he was like, he was Big Daddy in Cat on a Hot Tin Roof. Stop, shoot, I told you I'd shoot, but you wouldn't believe me. Why wouldn't you believe me? And so all of these things were built into that character. And when we went over to Nickelodeon, we had to make a demo tape in the closet of the hall from the office we were going into.
Wow.
And it was right out of the movies, you know. I had a script, and I was in the closet, you know, and I was like, and it was a broom with a microphone on it, and we had to make this makeshift recording. And so I read everything, and he went in to sell the show, and he came out and he said, "Congratulations, what you did helped sell the show." But then he decided he wanted to do the Ren character, which was fine with me. I didn't care. I mean, because I had a job doing voices in a cartoon. I was thrilled. And then eventually he got fired from the show, so I wound up doing both voices after the first season into the second season, and then from then on out, I did it. That was like a cultural phenomenon. It just hit, and I remember when it finally came to Australia, and I remember I was doing commercials for the Australian market, for Nickelodeon promos and stuff. Yeah.
Ren and Stimpy was like one of those shows where Nickelodeon just went, you know what, we'll do an adult cartoon, and just became more and more unhinged as it went on, and it became like a cartoon that really was no longer for children.
It was old school in the fact that old cartoons had something for everybody. You know, there were things that were going on that make the adults laugh and respond, and then there were things that the kids got, particularly, that the adults didn't get. They were wide spectrum of stimulus there for everybody.
Yeah.
And this cartoon was like that, you know. They enjoyed the success and everything, but then they began to say, "Oh, wait a minute, you know, we're supposed to be for children and that," and they were like disavowing their connection to it, but it made them so much money. You know, they were acting ashamed of it, like there were standards and practices, people, and they were particularly looking for disparaging images towards women.
Right.
You know, that was their job. Believe it or not, there are people. They hire psychologists. They hire this one, that one. You know, I think one of them might have been an alcoholic nun. She wouldn't have any issues, I imagine. But anyway, they were looking for disparaging images towards women, and they were so caught up in that and so fixated on that they missed all the gay stuff. You know, they were.
Are you a podcaster? Maybe you've got that big idea and you're looking for a network to join. The multi-award-winning Ozcast Network can get your content to eyes and ears all over the world. Join now for the first month free, and you could be featuring this sound at the beginning of your podcast.
Ozcast.
Simply head to ozcastnetwork.com for details.
References to Chippendales dancers, and instead of where the girl in the bikini would be, they put like this bodybuilder with the collar and the bow tie, you know. and they missed all that stuff.
When you're doing recording, do you have any tips for endurance? If you're recording a session for like 4 hours, how do you not lose your voice?
I would be screaming and yelling on that show. Screaming and yelling. Like, it was very cathartic. And I liked it for that reason. You could take out your aggression. You could take out your whole morning battling with crazy drivers on the way to work. You could take it all out on them behind a microphone.
Great stress relief.
You just channel it, you know. And I didn't lose my voice all that often. I just had a very strong set of vocal cords. But as you get older, your recovery time is slower. I'll start wearing out after a session, and I have to start with the tea and the honey and all that jazz. You know, I never had to do that before, but you know, you get older, and you know, it takes its toll. And doing Ren and Stimpy stuff now, I recorded some stuff, and it was like I'm screaming and yelling like I did 31 years ago, and I said, "You better keep a paramedic in the lobby," you know.
Does the tea work? from my point of view as a voiceover and someone who teaches voiceovers, what I tell all my students is if you're losing your voice, don't talk. Recovery is key. And I found like tea and honey, it gives you like a second of relief, but then you're back to a really sore, scratchy throat again.
Yeah, I think you're right. I think it's kind of a placebo.
Well, what do you do? What do you do?
What do I do?
Yeah.
I just hope for the best, and I try to hold up my end of the bargain until it's time to clock out of there.
Yeah. How long does a session go for normally?
Well, if you're talking about a Futurama session, they go from 4 hours, maybe 5 hours at the most. But sometimes we have to work in little teams. We used to do whole ensembles, but everybody got busy. Some people are famous and they're doing television shows and they didn't have time to come and be with us at particular times. So, but it all gets patched together and it works beautifully. But I do a really good array of stuff. I mean, I was so grateful to be able to express these beautiful characters like Philip J. Fry. Now, I didn't audition for him in the beginning. I wasn't, they had already cast the role. I was coming in to do Dr. Zoidberg and the professor. And, and they said he was 147 years old. And I figured him that he'd be an amalgam of wizards and mad scientists and, sorcerers, that kind of thing. Scrambled, old, absent-minded. And, I don't want to live on this planet anymore. And I figured he'd be a little jiggly, a little rickety. Yeah. And then Zoidberg, hence the name. I mean, I figured he said he would have a Yiddish sort of thing going on, and he was corpulent, he was big. So I didn't play against type. I wanted to do a lower register voice. You can play against type for experimentation and see if it sticks and see if it reads, but in this case it was the lower voice. So it was a combination of two different performers. One was a guy named Lou Jacoby. He was from Yiddish theater, and he was in the movie Arthur. And he leaned in and he went, "What's it like to have all that money?" And Dudley Moore said, "It doesn't suck." And then there was a guy in vaudeville named George Jessel. He was a master of ceremonies, and he had a marble mouth. And he was like, the definition of a smart ass? A fellow that can sit on an ice cream cone and tell you what flavor it is. And so I combined the two of them because Zoidberg had all this cool meat hanging off his face, and I figured he'd be impaired. So it became Zoidberg, You need an autograph? Well, not Zoidberg. Zoidberg could sign things. And he was understated, and I just wanted it to, I wanted them to sound real, like people you could know. Especially Fry. I sounded like him when I was 25 years old. I remembered what I sounded like. I was all whiny and nasally and complainy. And I was in a band, and I'd be like, "Oh, shit, I broke a string. Now what am I going to do?" I was needy, and I was all over the place. And I thought that would be perfect for Fry, because that's a voice I never did, was my own voice, like at a younger age. Yeah. And I figured he'd be a great match for Leela, who's strong and decisive, and Fry needs fixing, and he's neat. I was that same way. Girlfriends always wanted to fix me. "Why do you wear your hair like that? Fix that collar. Get rid of that shirt. I'll get you a shirt." I had to be fixed. and I thought that's a dimension that could play, not in so many words, but in his mannerisms. And it worked out really well to what Katie Segal was doing. Yeah. And then I got to do this pompous starship captain, Zapp Brannigan.
Yes.
Who was so deliciously stupid.
He sounds like Phil Hartman.
Yeah, well, I knew Phil Hartman. And he called me when I lived in New York. He called me up just to say he was a fan. And I said, "I kind of know who you are, too."
Wow.
Yeah, and he was so spiritually generous. He said, "You got to move to L.A." He said, "I'll help you get acclimated. But for somebody like you belong out here." And eventually I did, and we paired up. We actually did an M&M's commercial together. And
Nice.
and then his wife dispatched him, and it was so sad. And they were going to use him for
That's right.
Zapp Brannigan.
Yeah.
But the thing is that his when I was around him, we chatted about stuff that we really loved, like Big Dumb Announcers from the old days. He had an affinity for that, of course, and I loved it too. I love these guys that were like, "This conclude, this conclude, this conclude. That is all." You know,
Yeah.
I used to call them Big Dumb Announcers.
Yeah.
Because
Yeah.
they love the sound of their own voice far and away above anything else in the world. And so Zapp Brannigan was going to be one of those guys. And plus, I worked in radio, and I remember the tail end of those guys. They was on their way out, the Big Dumb Announcers, and they would emphasize every word, and they would hang on to the ends of words.
Yeah.
You know, so I thought that would be perfect for Zapp Brannigan. Yes, inform the men. I made it with a woman.
Yeah. Yeah.
Quick question on another one of your voices is Nixon. So you've got a bit of an interesting story.
I was talking with the writers, and they said, "Hey, you know, when you're doing Nixon, the Nixon voice, why do you do that Aru thing?" I said, "Oh, you don't like it?" And they said, No, we love it. We just don't know why you do it." So I told them that I watched the presidential debate in 1963, I think it was, or two, between Kennedy and Nixon for president. It was the first televised presidential debate ever. And Kennedy looked like a game show host with that beautiful bro cream hair and that ultra bright smile, you know, twinkle in his eye and soft focus. They made him look like a matinee idol. And then Kennedy's people told the camera people to do extreme close-ups of Nixon. It's the worst thing you could do to somebody, you know, because like his 5 o'clock shadow was coming in at 2 o'clock, and he was sweaty, and he was matted, and he was bumbling and grumbling, and it just was a mess. And he, you know, he was like, I want to be president of the United States because, and I said to my mom, because I was a big fan of horror movies, particularly The Werewolf and Lon Chaney Jr., and I said, Mom, that guy looks like he's going to turn into a werewolf. And so I kept thinking of him as that, like, I want to become president of the United States because you know, he's transforming. And then in 1970, that bastard drafted me when I got out of high school, Nixon. And I was going in the Army, and it turned out that I had the flattest feet you could ever imagine, and I had hypertension, which was kind of a form of high blood pressure. So they wouldn't take me. But to this very day in the Nixon library, to this very day plays a continuous loop of all the Nixon stuff I did on Futurama. So I won.
Whenever I see him on TV, though, with archive footage, I just think Nixon's back with your impersonation. It just clicks.
And the thing is, I don't sound anything like him. I just knew that to come up with the proper hook is what a character needs. Some kind of hook that the writers can keep referring back to. They can play with it, or they can leave it to me to incorporate it into certain things. But, you know, Impressionists did Nixon for years, and one of the things was he had these big jowls.
Yeah.
And so they would over-exaggerate it. They'd say, I heard him, Nixon. You know, and so I remembered that they used to do that, so I put a little of that into it. But the werewolf stuff,
It's so good.
seemed to endear him to everybody. And most people don't know why on earth that I'd be doing that, but it's
so right. You also do the voice of Woody Woodpecker, and I've tried to impersonate that so many times, but it made me feel so much better that it's sped up.
Yeah, it was always a sped up. It was always a sped up voice. Mel Blanc did it originally and created the laugh, and the laugh was built. It was built in pieces, like, you know. It'd be like, and then they speed it up. And now there's a guy, a contemporary of mine, young guy, Eric Bauza. He's doing all the Looney Tunes voices right now. And he does them in real time. And I believe he was doing Woody Woodpecker, the new version. And I think he did it in real time without it being sped up. I believe that because he's a phenom, he's like a hybrid.
I was going to ask you, do you know the Inner World shtick?
Inner World,
yes.
that stuff.
Yes. Could you do one about this interview? So we want to challenge you.
In a world where microphones are abundant, everyone has them. Plumbers have them. If you called a police officer today, they wouldn't answer if you called 911 because he's out looking for guests for his podcast. Everybody has a podcast. Microphones have been so fetishized to the point of ridiculousness. But in a world of millions of them, there's only one. One that I'm doing right now with two Aussies that are charming and wonderful. It's called Podcast the Movie.
Yay! That was fantastic.
Billy West. Brilliant. Really appreciate
Thank you
your
so
time,
much.
Billy.
You've been
It was
fantastic.
nice to talk to both of you.
Brilliant. Thank you so much, my friend.
Bye,
Talk to you
Billy.
soon.
Thank you very, very much.
Thank you for listening to This Is My Voice, the podcast about all things voice performance with the world's best voice artists. If you like what you heard, feel free to leave a review and don't forget to subscribe. This episode has been brought to you by the Australian Radio School and delivered to your ears by the Ozcast Network.
Are you a podcaster? Maybe you've got that big idea and you're looking for a network to join. The multi-award-winning Ozcast Network can get your content to eyes and ears all over the world. Join now for the first month free, and you could be featuring this sound at the beginning of your podcast.
Ozcast.
Simply head to ozcastnetwork.com for details.